Welcome back to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. Glad to be back for the 18th edition of the show. And we got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight. Some fun stuff when it comes to Indiana football and Indiana basketball. Definitely looking forward to talking about some more Hoosier athletics. Appreciate everybody for being here as always. Trying to get the subs up. We're getting close to 100 subscribers. Definitely appreciate your guys' support. We'll definitely get there with your help. And we got Jackson saying, "What's up, Hoosier Nation?" Appreciate that, Jackson. But definitely want to talk about Indiana football first before we get to Indiana basketball. I've been wrapping up the show with Indiana basketball the last few weeks because of them being on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. So that's definitely been an interesting discussion. Also talking about Mike Woodson not returning for Indiana next season. He's going to be retiring per se at the end of this season instead of getting fired. And also the ongoing coaching search for Indiana basketball. We'll talk about a little bit about all that kind of stuff at the end of the show. But the first thing we got to talk about is the Indiana football projected spring depth chart. This is really interesting because when you talk about next season for Indiana football, a lot of people are intrigued. Something that really wasn't the case this past year. Outside of Indiana fans, no one was really excited about Indiana football. No one thought that Curt Cignetti was going to have this rapid turnaround for the Hoosiers, having them make the college football playoff teams that were in the national championship game. I would have never thought that. I had them going 7-5, as I mentioned tons of times. Never would have thought they would have done that well. But now, with the great season they just had, now you have expectations for next season. And we're still a long ways away from next season in college football. We're like 60 days away right now from Indiana football spring game. We'll definitely talk about, the spring game and what that entails as we get closer to that. But right now there is a projected depth chart being, put online by people that really follow Indiana football. And I'm intrigued to see what they have. So let's definitely take a look at this real quick. They have at quarterback Fernando Mendoza, then Grant Wilson, and then Alberto Mendoza as the depth chart at quarterback. That's not a shock. Because Tyler Cherry unfortunately suffered an injury at the end of the season this past year, he's not going to be on the depth chart for 2025. He's still on the team, though. He's not left the team. Some people were concerned about that. They were like, oh, does that mean Tyler Cherry, he's no longer with the program? Yes, he is. He's going to be like on the staff or something like that. I don't really know exactly how they're making that cut and dry. I think it says right there he will serve as a student coach. That's what it says right there. So, yeah, he's not going to be a part of the team on the field next season, but he's going to still be a part of the program, and hopefully he'll be back, a part of, the team next season in 2026, and he doesn't transfer. But with Curtis Rourke being out of the program, going off to the NFL, they needed to get another starting quarterback. And even if Tyler Cherry did not get hurt, he was still young. He's a guy that you're not really expecting to go out there and just immediately be Indiana's starting quarterback. That's just not the case. Yeah, I mean, there was the potential for that, but since he got hurt, that really eliminated it. No one's really thinking Alberto Mendoza is going to be that guy either. And then you had, obviously, Taven Jackson. He decided to, unfortunately, transfer. And since he did, that didn't really leave Indiana with any experience. So Fernando Mendoza, enter him from Cal. And obviously, he probably transferred to Indiana not only for the reason of possibly being on a really good football team if Curt Cignetti can have back-to-back years of great football. Also, his younger brother's on the team, Alberto Mendoza. So that's really cool there. And Grant Wilson, probably a little surprised to see that name for some people that haven't really kept up with Indiana football that much during the offseason. Curt Cignetti added him from Old Dominion to kind of be the backup since Tyler Cherry is not available. So you definitely want to have depth. So that's good to have there. If something unfortunately would happen to Fernando Mendoza, hopefully that's not the case. But nothing surprising here. I'm not shocked to see this, being the depth chart, projected depth chart rather, for Indiana football at the quarterback position. I think Fernando Mendoza is clearly the QB1. I don't really think there's going to be any, quarterback battle of any kind. I think he's going to win the job. It's just going to end up being how successful that he is in the offense next season, whether he can replicate or somehow do better than Curtis Rourke next season. Then at running back, you've got Roman Hemby, Kalen Black, and Lee Beebe Jr. Now, this is not really shocking either. Indiana did lose their top 2 running backs this past season, Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, and they lost Elijah Green to the transfer portal. So I had to bring some guys in. Roman Hemby is a very familiar face. Played at Maryland the past few years, has lit up Indiana in previous games. He's got talent. He's a guy that I think with a better offensive line and better talent around him, he can have success. He could end up being a guy that has a shot at the NFL, maybe. His stats have trailed downward, unfortunately, in the last few seasons of college football. He was better earlier on, kind of like if Indiana fans remember Stevie Scott's trajectory at Indiana, how he started out very well, having a 1,000-yard season as a freshman, and then he never replicated that success. Roman Hemby, similar track record, started out his college career very well and has gone downhill, but I think that's more due to Maryland declining as a team as well, especially their offensive line. Not much you can do as a running back when you don't have a great offensive line. So Indiana definitely going to have a better offensive line. I think he's going to be the projected starting running back for sure next season. Interestingly enough, they have Kalen Black at number 2. I think probably because he was with the program this past season and he's had, a year under his belt of being under Curt Cignetti and did show flashes in the limited time he got. That's why they have him at number 2. But I would not be surprised if Lee Beebe Jr. takes the number 2 spot at running back. Very talented guy out of UAB. I know it's a small school, but Curt Cignetti lives off guys coming, from small programs. He's done a great job with those type of players. So I think the battle for the top running back spot, there is no battle. It's going to be Roman Hemby, but the other 2 guys, Kalen Black, Lee Beebe Jr., definitely going to be fighting for the second spot on the running back depth chart. Wide receiver, you got Elijah Surratt and E.J. Williams. Shocking E.J. Williams came back. Still crazy that he entered the portal but then came back. Omar Cooper and Charlie Becker, and then Mekhi Jackson and Tyler Morris. Even though on paper, this wide receiver room doesn't look as deep as last year's, still a lot of talent. And so big. Cannot stress how important it is that Elijah Surratt came back. If he doesn't come back with Indiana losing Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams, and Miles Cross, I think that might have been a little bit too tough for Indiana's wide receiver room. Even with all these portal additions. Yeah, I know Indiana's just coming off a season with tons of portal additions, but it's hard to do it 2 years in a row. Look at Florida State. After having a great year, then they had a really bad year. So I think having that continuity at wide receiver number 1 with Elijah Surratt is huge. I think that he's definitely going to be the leader that this receiving room needs. Omar Cooper, hopefully he can have a breakout year. I've been waiting for him to break out. He's never had a breakout season, not even this past year, but he showed flashes. If he could become a consistent wide receiver number 2, that would be massive. Massive for Indiana because you need to have 2 consistently great receivers, I feel like, to be a good college football team. You kind of had that last season for Indiana with Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams, and Miles Cross. It was like wide receiver by committee. You usually hear running back by committee, but in this case, it was like wide receiver by committee. All 3 of those guys had their big games, but there was no wide receiver 2 that was a consistent number 2 option. If Cooper could become that would be big. I like Mekhi Jackson and Tyler Morris. Crazy they got Mekhi Jackson above Tyler Morris, but probably because Mekhi Jackson had a lot of success at App State, whereas Tyler Morris lost time at Michigan, lost playing time. He started out kind of like other guys I mentioned, like Roman Hemby. Pretty good start to his Michigan career, but then it kind of trailed off longer he was there. So probably going to have to earn his way back. Kind of like E.J. Williams. He's never been able to do that. Had a really solid year at Clemson, but then has never really done anything since. So we'll see. I like Indiana's wide receiver room. Not as deep as last year's, but still has a lot of talent. Some young guys like Charlie Becker. I think it's pretty solid. Tight end, you got Holden Stage, James Bamba, and Riley Nowakowski. Holden Stage transfer from Tennessee. I think that's a massive pickup. I think he's a guy with a lot of talent. Even if he doesn't work out, then you got 2 other options in James Bamba, who's been with the program for years, and Riley Nowakowski coming over from Wisconsin. Knows Bob Bostad already. I really like this tight end group. It's not great in the pass game, but that's not something that Curt Cignetti necessarily does all the time. When you see a lot of coaches, some of them really emphasize the tight ends and they get them the ball all the time. But you don't see that as much with Indiana because of Curt Cignetti's style of play. You look back at his time at James Madison and other programs, he doesn't utilize the tight ends all the time. I think that all 3 of these guys are really solid blocking tight ends. And if they can contribute a little bit in the passing game, kind of like Zach Horton had this past year for Indiana, then I think the tight end room should be fine. Offensive line. Yes, losing Mike Kadick and Trey Wettig is tough. Losing 2 offensive linemen is always tough. But you got Carter Smith back, Drew Evans, and also you got other guys like Bray Lynch back. Then you got Khalil Benson. This is ironic. You do not see this hardly ever. Khalil Benson, who was at Indiana under Tom Allen, left and went to Colorado. Now he's back. He's coming back to Indiana football, and he's probably going to be a starter. That's crazy. That is big. So you kind of have some chemistry. You know, it's a completely new coaching staff. Then you also got Zim Mikowski coming over from Ohio State. This is so huge. I cannot stress how big of a deal this is for Indiana football to get an offensive lineman from Ohio State. I know Ohio State fans are like, well, he didn't play much. He's a guy that's raw. He needs a lot more development. That's Curt Cignetti's alley. Curt Cignetti has done a great job with development already in just 1 year at Indiana. I love this pickup. You do not turn down a guy from Ohio State, and I think he is definitely going to be one of the key pieces to Indiana's offensive line next season. And then you also see Pat Coogan coming over from Notre Dame. Look at Indiana. They're not there yet. I've talked with several people online, and I agree with those people that it's going to take a little bit of time for Indiana to really compete with the big boys for big-time recruits. It's going to take more time as a good program. You just can't have this 1 year and then it all falls apart. Like this year, they have a terrible season and expect that, those players to come even with money. Indiana's up in their NIL game. But it will be tough in that regard. But I think if Indiana has a few more good seasons in football with Curt Cignetti, you're going to be seeing more of these type of additions. I like the offensive line. I think Bob Bostad's an excellent offensive line coach. The offensive line has gotten better year over year under his watch. And I think with the additions Indiana's made, the offensive line has the potential to be better than last season. Then you look at defense, Mikael Kamara, just like Elijah Surratt. This is why I think Indiana is going to avoid having one of those massive letdown years after this one good season, right? When you look at a lot of programs, they have a lightning in a bottle year and they can't replicate it. Indiana has brought back key returners like Elijah Surratt, like Mikael Kamara. They didn't bring these guys back, I'd be more concerned. I am a little concerned anyway with the schedule, and we'll talk about that a lot more when we get closer to the season. But still, I think that a big-time collapse next season is not going to happen with these type of returners. Mikael Kamara, definitely a guy, that probably should have gone off to the NFL. He was probably Indiana's best draft, hopeful off this past year's team, even better than Rourke, some of the other players that were out of eligibility. Mikael Kamara probably would have been a top 3 round pick, but he's coming back. He's got unfinished business, maybe wanting to improve his stock even more. Don't really know how he can because he had a great season this past year. But I hope he has another great year. Hopefully, the one thing that does concern me is that he is a little, undersized. So maybe teams will figure out how to scheme him better. If they do that, that can, make his production go down a little bit. But I do like Mikael Kamara returning for Indiana. I think that's going to be huge because Indiana's losing C.J. West, James Carpenter, Linnell Carr, Jacob Mangan-Farrar. All those guys were very key to the defense last year. I think Tadarius Collins is a very young guy that has a lot of potential still. Mario Landino's getting a lot better. Indiana's defensive line, I'm not going to lie, though. I think this is probably the weakest position for Indiana going into next season. I'm a little concerned with it. There is, probably, another piece or two that you would like to get. Maybe they can shore that up in spring football. We'll see. Hosea Wheeler, solid transfer addition from Western Kentucky. I would like to see another piece or two here, but still, Mikael Kamara coming back makes that position not too much of a weakness. Then linebackers, you lose Jalen Walker, but you get Aiden Fisher back. Same thing. That's another massive addition for Indiana to get back. Then you got Elijah Hardy and Caden Turner with a lot of upside, Isaiah Jones. I wish Jalen Walker could have been able to come back too. He was excellent, but can't get them all back. I think the linebacker room's looking pretty good as long as one of those other guys steps up next to Aiden Fisher. Then defensive backs. D'Angelo Pons is back. I was concerned maybe he'd transfer. Maybe some other programs would try to poach him away. Again, Indiana up in their NIL game. That is massive to get a guy like D'Angelo Pons back. But then look at this corner and safety room. You got Amari Farrell back. You got Lewis Moore, just like Khalil Benson. Lewis Moore was at Indiana a couple years ago. Transfers to Ole Miss. He's back. It's crazy how that happened. 2 guys came back. Then you got Ryland Gandy and Amarian Knighton in the transfer portal. I think those are both really solid additions. Indiana did lose a couple guys at the portal with all of these portal additions to the corner room, but I think Indiana's corner and safety room is deep, and I think with D'Angelo Pons leading the way, it could definitely be a strength of the defense. And then special teams, Nico Radicic, he's back. And then Mitch McCarthy. It is tough to lose James Evans. James Evans was the punter for Indiana for the last 5 seasons. He's gone, but Mitch McCarthy coming over from UCF. A lot of people are high on him. So I think Indiana's special teams room should be fine. But when you look at that, though, when you look at Indiana football's projected spring depth chart, it looks pretty good. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, but no teams is right now. Sometimes guys might come out of the blue, like Indiana's defensive line. Looks a little weak right now. Might end up being one of the strengths of the team. If some guys pan out, you never know. But I really like Indiana's, team looking forward for next season. I think it is definitely a team with some high returning talent, but also a lot of young guys with potential, and also some key transfer additions that I think that's the Cignetti recipe to hopefully have another good year. Then you got Indiana football top players of 2024. I just want to touch on this really, really quickly. Pro Football Focus named the top 101 players of the season, and they had 3 Indiana players. When would you have ever seen that in the past, right? Like having 3 of the top 101 players in college football at Indiana. They had Curtis Rourke at 41, Mikael Kamara at 59, who's coming back, and D'Angelo Pons at 73. So you've got 2 of those 3 guys back for Indiana. That's huge. If they could even somehow improve, especially I think Pons could improve even more, but that's big for Indiana. Definitely showing that the Hoosiers are on the way up. Then we got to go to something else. This is kind of starting to bridge the gap between the football part of the show onto the basketball part of the show. I want to talk about this, and I'm probably going to end up talking about this for about close to 10 minutes, so buckle in. This is a wild allegation. A wild allegation. That the more I think about it, it doesn't shock me at all. It doesn't shock me at all to see this. I mean, we're talking about Indiana. There's always conspiracy going on with the Hoosiers behind the scenes when it comes to coaching news and, players and everything. I mean, everybody remembers the Trey Galloway and some of the other players. They were saying like they were gambling or whatever. It's like, okay, there's always crazy stuff going on with IU. Curt Cignetti conspiracy, though. That's what I titled the show. Curt Cignetti denies report he's pushing for Vanderbilt's Mark Byington to be Indiana coach, the Indiana basketball coach. Now, I thought it was funny before this conspiracy came out. There were people saying that Curt Cignetti could become the Indiana basketball coach. Now, that was funny. I was like, really? Like, are we actually doing this right now? Like, Curt Cignetti cannot be the head basketball coach and the head football coach. That's not feasible. Plus, I don't think Curt Cignetti knows that much about basketball. I mean, I'm sure he knows, enough to probably be able to coach like Little League or something. But, I don't think Curt Cignetti should be the Indiana basketball coach. Now, I know a lot of IU fans were memeing like, hey, he'd do better than Woody. You know what? I maybe wouldn't doubt that. IU has been pretty bad the last couple of years in basketball, but still. But to get into the meat and potatoes of this, though, the reason why this is not shocking, you see Vanderbilt's Mark Byington, and you're like, well, why are people saying Curt Cignetti would even be pushing for this? The reason why is because Mark Byington was the James Madison head basketball coach. If you recall, James Madison made the NCAA tournament this past year, and he got the Vanderbilt job because of the job he did at James Madison. And Curt Cignetti was at James Madison when Mark Byington was at James Madison. So they know each other because obviously, head coaches of different athletics team, programs out of school are going to run into each other. They know each other. So Mark Byington gets the Vanderbilt job. Well deserved. And you look at Vanderbilt, they're in a better position for the tournament than Indiana is. And Indiana spent over $5 million on their roster. How much has Vanderbilt spent on their basketball roster? Probably not a whole lot. So very impressive stuff what Mark Byington has done. And actually, legitimately, he is a candidate for the job. Now, do I think he's going to get the job? No. But what it just makes this so interesting, though, is that people are saying Curt Cignetti would be pushing for this. For one thing, I don't think, Curt Cignetti, behind the scenes is now I don't know. I can't say. This is just me saying. This is just my opinion. I don't know for sure. I could be completely wrong, and if I am, I'll say that I am, in future shows when we get more information. But in my opinion, I just don't think that Curt Cignetti is all that concerned with the basketball team's affairs right now. I mean, he's the head coach of the football team, and it's his second year. It's not like he's been with the school now for 6-7 years and Indiana football is rolling, and maybe he's got some time to sit back and be like, you know what, let me take a look at Indiana basketball for a little bit. He's got to make sure Indiana football doesn't have a letdown year. You know, like he's got to make sure that this past season wasn't a fluke, right? So Indiana football, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that Curt Cignetti has to do. I mean, you saw when he got the job how, like, he had all this stuff on his desk. He took a picture of his desk, like his checklist. Like, he's busy all the time. So I just don't really think that he's really that involved with this. Like I said, I could be completely wrong. Maybe he is, but I don't see it. Now, if Mark Byington does get the job, then that's going to reopen the argument that Curt Cignetti had something to do with it. Because what is it a coincidence that, a former James Madison coach would get the job, or, or did Curt Cignetti actually have some involvement with it? I don't know. All I know is that, in my opinion, I think Scott Dolson, the athletic director for Indiana, just needs to do his job, just like he did with Curt Cignetti, and hire the best person for the job that he thinks. Now, that person could end up not working out for the 80th time for Indiana basketball, like all the other failed coaches, but that's what he needs to do. There doesn't need to be any involvement from Curt Cignetti. There doesn't need to be any involvement from Quinn Buckner, Calvert Chaney, or any of the other people involved with Indiana, basketball, or just any Indiana athletics in general. Scott Dolson needs to sit, and he needs to look at every available coach that he thinks is a candidate for the job, and just start narrowing it down from coaches that say no. I mean, I'd ask everybody. I mean, I agree. Like, people saying, like, oh, Brad Stevens. Yeah, Brad Stevens wasn't going to happen. That was a joke. I knew it wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen last time. It's not going to happen now. He's got one of the best jobs in America at the Celtics. Why would he take the Indiana job? But if you ask, you ask. It doesn't hurt. What do people always say? It doesn't hurt to ask. So just ask. But he's not going to take the job. It's just no way. Absolutely not. And honestly, I think it's crazy how quickly he turned it down this time. With words, I understand people, well, he just said it in words. Doesn't mean it's true. I think it's true. I don't think that Brad Stevens is considering Indiana at all. But I just think it's crazy that he turned it down as quickly as he did publicly. Because last 4 years ago, last time Indiana needed a coach, it was a lot later in the cycle. Obviously, Mike Woodson, announcing he's not coming back. It's earlier than when Archie Miller got fired, but like it didn't really last that long with the Brad Stevens hype. Definitely, he shot it down quick. But then you got a lot of other coaches. You got your Dusty Mays. You got people are still throwing around Nate Oates and Scott Drew. I laugh at that. I mean, the Kentucky job was just open. You think? I mean, I know Indiana fans don't want to hear this, but if you think that those guys turned down the Kentucky job, that they go to Indiana, I mean, Kentucky, in probably the eyes of 99% of Americans, is a better job than Indiana. Even though I don't like saying that, but it is. I mean, Kentucky's got more titles. They've been relevant recently. They're still good right now. That they got Mark Pope. Indiana hasn't been good in forever. Indiana is one of the 5 to 7 best programs in college basketball, but they got to get back to winning. They just got to hire somebody that's actually going to get them to the tournament and get to Sweet 16s and Elite 8s again. Then we'll talk. Then we can get back in the discussion. Indiana's been rough, man. They got to get a lot better. And I just don't think any of those guys are candidates. And a guy like Rick Pitino, I mean, even with all the allegations and the stuff that's happened in the past, I mean, he's old. I wouldn't do that either. Just like people were throwing around, John Beilein 4 years ago. I wouldn't go after someone really old. I know Cignetti's older, but it's not the same thing. I mean, Cignetti still has a lot of, youth and vibrancy and energy in him. Other guys, Rick Pitino still is fire, but he's really old. I wouldn't do that. There's just a lot of coaches that I wouldn't even consider, or Indiana won't have a shot to get. It just kind of narrows it down. Then you start getting to the more attainable options like Chris Beard or Buzz Williams or even Mark Byington or the McCollum guy at Drake. There are attainable coaches. It's going to be interesting. But regardless, I hope this report is false. Like Curt Cignetti denied it, but I hope it's false. I don't want any involvement for the head coaching job, not even from Curt Cignetti. Like Curt Cignetti, fantastic football coach, and I hope he does great things in Indiana for many years to come. But I don't want anybody involved. I don't want any scandals. Indiana basketball does not need scandals. They've had way too many with the Kelvin Sampson stuff. A lot of people trashing Woody behind the scenes. The Tom Crean stuff with the AD back then, Fred Glass. There's just so much stuff that has gone wrong with Indiana basketball over the last 25 years since Bob Knight was fired. Yet another scandal. They do not need any more scandals like, oh my gosh, Mark Byington got the job because Curt Cignetti said to hire him with his suggestion. Then Indiana hires him. He doesn't work out. And then, Cignetti, he did it. It's his fault. It was his suggestion. He ruined Indiana basketball. Kind of like they're saying with Quinn Buckner is the one that wanted Mike Woodson, and it's his fault. You don't need any of that. You don't see this in other programs. You do not need that. Indiana basketball does not need that. Scott Dolson just needs to sit down, hire somebody that will consider the job and who he thinks is the best candidate for the job, and hopefully that guy does a good job so Indiana basketball can finally start winning again on a consistent basis. But they do not need any more instances like this where, conflict arises out of, something that shouldn't even be there. I don't think Curt Cignetti's involved with the Indiana basketball job. I kind of think it's humorous and hilarious, but then when you really dive deep down into it, it isn't something Indiana needs. So if Mark Byington is being the head coach, that's cool. Hopefully it works out. Don't think it would be a terrible hire. I would pick other people over him, but definitely don't want it to be because of any involvement with Curt Cignetti. But we'll see. Definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with that, and definitely we'll update on this story if we get any more information. Last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up the show, though. Indiana basketball still on the bubble. This is hilarious, folks. Indiana looked dead in the water last week. 14-10, haven't won a game in over a month. They're playing like garbage, and then they go on the road. They go on the road, and they beat Michigan State. And you're like, oh, man, Indiana's back. They went on the road, knocked off a top 15 team. Indiana has a shot. And everybody was saying, I even asked a few bracketologists on Twitter their thoughts. And they said if Indiana beats UCLA, they're in the NCAA tournament field. Some people were already projecting Indiana in the tournament field after beating Michigan State. Guess what, though? And this is why Mike Woodson is not going to be the head coach for Indiana next season. Indiana let another game slip away. Like they let the Maryland game slip away, the Michigan game slip away, the at Purdue game slip away, and this UCLA game. Indiana was gifted. I mean, absolutely gifted. Multiple chances to beat UCLA. And they couldn't do it. I mean, they had no shot. They were down like 70-63 with like a minute and 20 seconds left. And there's a flagrant foul that Anthony Leal draws. He and then Indiana has him go to the monitor to look. They call flagrant. UCLA misses the front end because it was a foul on Leal. But then the guy retaliated. Indiana cuts it to 5. And then Indiana's hitting free throws, and they cut it to 2. And they have 4 looks at it at the end. And Baco misses a layup. They miss Rice for a wide open layup down low. Don't even pass it to him. And Baco misses the 3. Which now you're seeing reports that Mbako's still hurting from the game. If that's the case, Woodson should have got Goody in the corner instead of Mbako. But again, digress. But Indiana blew that game. Had chances in the end. But they blew that game despite playing very well. But as you can see right now on the bracket matrix, Indiana is essentially anywhere from the 3rd to the 5th team out of the NCAA tournament. They still have a chance at 15-11 and 6-9 in the league. If they win against Purdue on Sunday, Indiana, according to most bracketologists, will be back in the tournament field. This is a joke. This shows you absolutely how weak the tournament bubble is. It is a very, very weak year for the bubble. And this is why I wrote on Twitter earlier today, and this is a whole other topic that I could talk about on a future show. And I've talked about it on my channel, Only Talk Sports, before. We do not need tournament expansion. People are trying to – what are we doing for college football? We're expanding it. We're adding more teams. A 12-team playoff. Now they want a 16-team playoff. They want all this expansion, right? Oh, more teams, more money, more fun, whatever. I don't agree with it. It adds more terrible basketball. I mean, I know that the bubble's not always this bad, but the bubble is bad this year in college basketball. Indiana and North Carolina shouldn't even be sniffing the bubble, but they are because the bubble's not very good. And they're wanting to expand the NCAA tournament to 76 teams. No, absolutely not. And that's why I got the GIF. I don't agree with it. I do not want expansion. I know people are like, well, if they had a 76-team tournament, then Indiana and North Carolina would be in. Indiana and North Carolina don't deserve to be in. I mean, Indiana, yeah, I want them to make the tournament. I do. I want North Carolina to make the tournament, but only if they deserve it. Only if they actually win their games down the stretch of the season and get in. We do not need expansion. The tournament, I don't want to say it's perfect as is, because I even think maybe the first four is kind of overdoing it a bit. But I would leave the tournament as is. Keep the auto bids. This isn't football where, teams get blown out all the time. These little schools have a shot. Basketball is a different sport. Keep the auto bids, keep the Cinderellas, and then just keep it at 68. Do not add any more teams. I do not want that to happen. But knowing the NCAA and people in general, they're always thinking more is better when that's not always the case. We're probably going to have an expanded tournament one day, but I hope it does not happen. But regardless, for Indiana Hoosier fans that do want Indiana to win, because there are some people that are so mad at Woody that they just want Indiana to keep losing until he's gone. He's gone, folks. He's not coming back. I'm still rooting for Indiana to make the tournament. If they beat Purdue at home, yet another opportunity, then they'll have a shot. I've heard from most people they need to go at least 3-2 down the stretch to have a chance to get in, more likely 4-1. Beat Purdue at home, beat Penn State at home, beat Ohio State at home, get the Washington game on the road. They're in the field. But can Woody do that? I wouldn't count on it. But they definitely still have a chance because they got that game over Michigan State. But thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. Always a blast talking Hoosier athletics, Hoosier basketball, and football with you guys. Definitely appreciate you being here. I'll read through your comments really, really quickly. We got Dave's here. Said, "Isn't that a red shirt?" I'm not sure if you're talking about me or somebody. Probably you're talking about the depth chart I was talking about earlier on somebody for Indiana. But appreciate you being here. Godfather of the SEC says, "Hello, everyone. Appreciate you for stopping by." Thanks for shouting out all the other shows, Jackson. Absolutely, the Alabama Collins show. You don't want to miss that. And also, my YouTube channel, Only Talk Sports. Trying to get more subs over on my YouTube channel, Only Talk Sports. Definitely, me and Will and D do a show every week talking college football and other things. You don't want to miss that. Appreciate the support. And then you got Troy V saying, of course, Vandy's better at basketball. The SEC is a basketball conference now. Yeah, 14 of the 16 teams are trying to make the field. Only LSU and South Carolina's not going to get in. I think some are going to play their way out, though. Oklahoma, Georgia, they're collapsing. Arkansas still hanging on by thin ice. We'll see. But if the SEC somehow got 14 teams in, it would be hilarious. It would be like a record since the Big East did that a long time ago, in like 2011, last year, that they were a really dominant conference before the Big East broke up. And it would also show how bad the other conferences like the ACC are doing. But definitely Mark Byington doing a good job there. And then Will and D says all he did was get Dulce's phone number, probably. Yeah, that's funny, Will. So definitely appreciate all you guys for being here with Jackson, Troy V, Will and D, and all you guys. Appreciate it a lot. And before we wrap it up, we got a message from Mark Rogers.
Ohio State, Michigan, the greatest rivalry in sports deserves the greatest debate in sports. Monday, February 17th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the main channel. It's the Ohio State, Michigan All Everything Debate with me, taking your calls all night if it takes all night. I'm pulling no punches, so beware. Bring your best intel. It's the Ohio State, Michigan All Everything Debate. It will be epic. February 17th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Be there.
Even though the show has already passed, definitely, if you want to go back and watch that debate, because, Ohio State, Michigan fans, it's always crazy when those two programs are going at it, whether on the field, on the court, or on social media, just everywhere practically. So definitely go check out that live stream. It was crazy. Appreciate again, everybody, for being here. We'll be back next Tuesday night to talk about some more Indiana Hoosier football and basketball news. Appreciate everybody for being here tonight, and go Hoosiers.